Far out. Now I look like I've had a hard job of getting online tonight. Anyway, welcome. Thank you so much, Madeleine, for coming along into 30 Plus to talk to us all about your expertise in the area of childhood trauma. We so appreciate you coming along. We know that you're a wealth of knowledge, and so I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and tell the ladies a little bit about yourself, what you do, sort of where you came from, or even how you got into this area of expertise, and then we'll just go from there with some questions.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Madeleine Amie. I'm a psychologist, and I've been working in New Zealand and Australia for probably the last 15 or so years in this field, and I specialize in childhood trauma. So at the moment I have a private practice and I see kids that have experienced trauma as well as teenagers and adults, and I write programs for foster carers that look after kids that have gone through trauma as well. So I suppose what got me into this was when I was young, I felt like I never had somebody to talk to, and that's why I wanted to be a psychologist. So maybe I could be that person for somebody else to be able to talk to. And it probably wasn't until I broke up with my husband that I realized the impact of my own childhood trauma. So that took me a long time, and I'm a psychologist and I have access to all this information, but still it took me ages to kind of figure it out for myself. So now that I want to share, the things that I've learned and hopefully be able to help other people with that knowledge.
Wow, that's massive. So Madeleine, was it before or after your breakup with your husband that you studied psychology? Was it something that you had already planned to do from from really young, or did you pick it up afterwards?
No, I kind of surprised myself and passed 7th form. So I didn't think that I'd even get into university. I feel like sometimes I accidentally fell into being a psychologist. And so then I did my degree at Massey. And then I had a few gap years and finished my studies in Australia. And that's where I did my internship and started working there before I had my kids and I came back home. So yeah, so it's probably been a long time in this field, before I figured out that, the impact of childhood trauma, even though I already kind of knew it was always there, but, when it's yourself, it's so harder to see.
Yeah. That's actually a really, really good point. And one of the questions that we have, and it's, I'm just going to read it straight from my little bit of paper I printed out here so I get all the words right. But so this one particular question which suits that is exactly is, she wants to know how we can tell if our issues are from childhood trauma or something else, because like you said, you can't always see it when it's yourself. And if so, how do we pin down what trauma that issue is related to, and what trigger, where does it come from? It's quite a loaded question actually, or why it might only be coming to the surface after 48 years. So that's a good one for you.
Yeah, I suppose when you're trying to address something, you'd want to go for a holistic approach. So you're wanting to look at what are your current triggers, what are you experiencing in your body, look at looking after your body, nourishing your nervous system, trying to see if there's any other kind of health issues as well, and looking at the person from that whole being. But then also, because I deal with trauma and childhood trauma all the time, like from my perspective, that still affects a lot of how we live our lives today. And when we're children and our experiences in childhood, it essentially gives us a map to navigate adulthood. And if you're not kind of being reflective, or you're just kind of on automatic pilot, sometimes we've got these really strong responses and we don't realize that it comes out of childhood. So when you're thinking about what's happening in your life right now, think about the triggers or the experiences that you feel in your body. Like, are they familiar to you? Do you feel small? Do you feel vulnerable? Because perhaps that is stemming from childhood trauma. Yeah.
So I did a couple of sessions with a psychologist earlier on in the year, and I didn't really realize, I mean, I did know, I was pretty sure that most people need counselling to some degree, but I was so amazed with the couple of sessions that I did with him, how much was unpacked and how much of my power I felt like I got back just on 2 sessions that I did with him, just 2 1-hour sessions. They were amazing. One of the sessions he talked about, and this is coming into your expertise here, was fight, flight, freeze and fawn. So fight, flight, freeze I've heard of, but fawn was new to me, and I still haven't really registered that well in my brain. So if you could just unpack that a little bit for us, that'd be awesome.
Okay, yeah, because not many people have heard about it, and that's when I learned about it. I was like, oh, this just makes so much sense to me because that's what I experience. And I don't know if you've heard about codependency, like the relationships where boundaries get a bit blurry. So kind of codependency falls underneath the fawn umbrella, but you have fight. So this is where you might have bullying kind of tendencies or explosive anger, and you feel like you got to fight to get your needs met, because in childhood, that's what you had to do. You had to fight, otherwise your needs weren't going to be met at all. And so in adulthood, that can look like narcissistic behavior, always having to win all the time, controlling, manipulative, all those types of behaviors. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have fawn. So with narcissism, you know, people kind of lack empathy. And then with fawn, the fawn response, you're highly empathetic, but you're so empathetic that you sacrifice yourself and you meet other people's needs and you neglect your own. And then you don't have that fight response. So you don't protect yourself when you need to and stand by your boundaries. And because you've had to give up yourself, usually with a narcissistic parent, and looking after the narcissistic parent's emotions, you have a bit of a rocky sense of self. It's really hard to know where you stand on things and that sense of who you are. Then we have flight, which is acting maybe impulsively or getting obsessive or always being in a rush, feeling panicky, or always on the go. And then we've got freeze, which is the opposite of that, where you kind of slump and you want to withdraw from the world and lie on the couch and you can't move. So to me, when I learned about the fawn response, it's like, well, it makes sense that there'd be 4 because, you know, you got flight and freeze, which are opposites, and then you got fight. But where's fight's opposite? Well, it's fawning, except we don't really know about fawning because it doesn't really impact other people as negatively as fight. You know, if you've got somebody that's always giving other people a hard time or they're being violent or abusive, you're going to be like, whoa, you've got a problem. But with fawn response, if you're being way too nice to everybody, no one's going to complain about that. But what happens is you end up kind of suffering in silence and having all these emotions and anxiety or low moods, and you still have to try and figure that out.
Wow, that is really deep stuff. So any one of those, like could you be a combination of those different things, or are you usually generally just one?
Oh, well, we all need to access all those different survival responses. Like you need fight to be able to protect yourself when you need to. You need flight to be productive and persevere or get yourself out of a situation. You need freeze so that you can stop and be mindful of the world. And then you need fawn so that you can be compassionate towards other people and compromise and work together. But I guess the danger lies in if you become over dependent on a particular response. So if you're always fighting all the time, that's going to be an issue. Or if you're constantly in flight and you can't sit still, and every time, you know, you got these emotions and you can't manage them, you're cleaning the house or you're going out shopping or you're doing this and you can't process everything because you're always in flight. Or if you're in freeze and you're low and you're feeling depressed, or fawn, where you give yourself away to everybody else and you don't have any boundaries and a sense of self. So yeah, it can impact you in different ways, but we all want to be able to access all of those responses in a healthy way.
Yeah, so how do you know, how would you know if it was a trauma-based thing? Like if you have those responses, is it just because one of those responses is overly embellish, sort of like you're doing it too hardcore. That's really bad English.
But I think it would stem from that map that you're given in childhood, and that's your response. So that's where it generally develops, and then over time in adulthood, then it really becomes a pattern of behavior that you can see.
So let's say in childhood you had a really angry parent who was really loud and abusive, and you found in childhood that the best way to navigate that was just to be quiet and to just go into yourself. Is that what you would display in adulthood if you were traumatized by your childhood? Would you do that? Would you have that same response to angry people?
Yeah, well, that would be your natural go-to. That would probably be your automatic response. If there's angry people around, maybe I need to placate them or go under the radar and become invisible. So yeah.
Wow. So how do you navigate your way out of those those responses to trauma if you've had them your whole entire lifetime? And look, we're all 30 plus, and if you've had these things since you were children, where the heck do you start?
Yeah, well, I think gathering information and learning about things like that helped me, learning about this and reading books and things like that, but also just being curious. So we have all these automatic responses, and maybe we want to run and hide when something happens, or maybe we're setting a boundary with somebody and we feel sick in our stomach and we feel guilty that we're going to disappoint them, and it just feels absolutely awful. You know, anything that doesn't feel very pleasant, you want to start to be curious about that and pull it apart and go, okay, what am I feeling right now? Can I slow it down? Can I just be mindful of what's happening in this present moment? And the more that we're able to be mindful and curious about what's happening, the more that we're going to have flexibility and being able to change it.
So with again, going back to when you have these things happen to you in childhood and you've taken them through your whole entire life, is there a chance of, and you don't want to repeat that behavior because you don't want to hurt your children and you don't want them to go through what you went through, is there a chance of overcompensating and going the other side of the pendulum where it comes to parenting your children and actually being just as damaging? For example, again, the angry parent response, and then thinking nobody's ever going to be angry with my children, and so protecting them from that kind of anger. And can that happen? Like, is it actually a trauma-based thing when you're overprotective of your children in that way?
Yeah, totally. And I think about if you had really intense experiences with your parents, then that was probably their trauma coming to light. And I guess we can only do the best with what we know and what we know how to do. But yeah, if we're kind of aware of it, are we being overprotective, or are we not setting boundaries with our kids and then our kids are walking all over us? Yeah. And so it can play out in different ways. I think if you're worried about whether your own trauma is affecting your parenting, the best thing that you can do is just like really connect with your kids and validate their emotions, allow them to freely be who they are and express themselves. And maybe you're not going to like that, but then, as our job as parents, we're there to connect with them and emotionally receive them. And then once they feel like we understand them, we get them, then we can help guide them.
What about, again, because a lot of us are in the older, some of us have still got little ones, but some don't, some are way further along than that. And what if you're even listening tonight and thinking, man, I've just spent, I've just parented my children all the way through to adulthood with my trauma, and now I've produced adults who will have their own sets of trauma based on the way you parented them. And is there any coming back from that? Is there can those conversations still happen with adult children?
Sure.
Do any of that?
Definitely. And the kids I work with, they love it when they have those conversations. I mean, like kids as in like 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, when they're actually able to have those conversations with their parents and everything gets out in the open and they can talk about it and it's not dangerous, it's not, it's a safe space for them to be able to saying, you know what, like, I'm human, I was just doing the best that I could, but maybe it affected you in this way. And for them finally to feel validated and heard, yeah, that can definitely be really healing.
Oh, that's so nice. Okay, let me just have a look at these questions so that I don't miss anybody's. Okay, so I've got this one from the lady. She said her background is that she's got a very narcissistic and controlling mother who favoured her brothers over her. She allowed her brothers to treat her badly and still does to this day. She plays games and is never direct and will gaslight her when she pulls her up on her behaviour. Now she said now that she's older, she can see the cracks and she makes them accountable for their behaviour. Now she's trying. Sorry, I'm trying to this was just like a Facebook text that I put together. She still protects them and and talking doesn't help. How do I trust her again? Like, my walls are up and I don't know how to trust her or let her in. So yeah, so obviously is still showing favour to the brothers and gaslighting her. So that's fun.
Yeah. And how can she trust her?
Yeah.
Well, can she be trusted if mum hasn't had any growth or doesn't want to have that conversation? It can be really hard to shift those dynamics. And I suppose sometimes in these situations you can't trust that parent unless there's been some growth or they're ready to have that conversation. Of course, you'd want to have trust in that parent and maybe acknowledge all those good things that you see when, you know, you have those nice moments. But then I'd be looking at, oh, what can you do in the relationship? What can you control? What is your contribution that you're able to work on regardless of what mum's doing? And is that changing the dynamic in some sort of way? And I know those dynamics are so hard because they're ingrained since childhood, and it can be really, really hard to break them up and make them different. And I know it sounds like a difficult situation if the brothers have been treated differently. And so in their mind, they're like, yeah, mum's great. And we're like, she does this and that. It's you're the problem in those types of situations. So it can feel like you're the odd one out. But I'd get support and get people on your team so that you're able to deal with that situation.
That's a really hard one, because I actually do know a couple of people personally who have actually now withdrawn from their mother, completely, totally withdrawn, and feel and saying that they feel so much happier in their life and so much better because that person, that narcissistic parent, is out of their life, but yet there's a real sadness because they don't have the mum that they wanted or needed, really.
And you always hope to have that parent, regardless of how they've treated you. You always want that mum or that dad.
Yeah. So how the heck does somebody, how do they release that when a parent is narcissistic? And as most people know, narcissists don't very often even know that narcissist, do they? So how are they going to want to change? They're going to probably always be a difficult parent. So what does that mean, that you just release your parent in the blue by you and get on with your life and pretend you're happy to have no parent? Or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of grief and loss work that needs to be done when you're letting go of that parent, and some parents need to be loved from afar, some need to be loved in small doses, and then if you are able to have a better relationship and change those dynamics, then you can have a better outcome. But it's not always the case, and it's not your fault. It's just the situation, and you can only do the best that you can. So really looking after yourself in those situations and acknowledging it as a loss and having that time to grieve and have that space.
So sad, because so you said that you really will actually end up grieving them, because even if it's like you said, loving them from the balcony, even if you have to give them that much space, that doesn't really feel like a real parent-child relationship. And you know that you're creating that space because they can't be trusted in your space. So that grief thing, that would be so real. That would be like death, except they're still there.
Yeah, that's hard, right? They're still alive and you still well, they should be this way, parents are supposed to be this way, and you have in your mind the idea of like the perfect parent, and then some people just aren't capable of that. Yeah, and also with narcissists, and if you have a narcissistic parent and then they have a habit of exploiting you and being controlling, everything that you know about boundaries, it's like you got to flip that on its head, because with boundaries, if you have difficulty with boundaries, you're having trouble setting them with other people. Except with a narcissist, they see your boundary and they're just going to walk all over it. They're like, they don't care about your boundaries.
Yeah.
It's more having boundaries with yourself. Okay, if they do this, I'm going to make sure that I do that, or I'm going to do this for myself, or I'm going to limit the amount of time or the way that I'm interacting with this person, and just look at the things that you do have control over in the relationship.
Wow, that's amazing. So if you have a narcissistic parent, how often, I don't know if you know statistically, how often would you end up being narcissistic as well, because of the fact that you were starved of love or emotion or whatever? I don't even know exactly how you become narcissistic, but
it depends on a lot of factors like temperament, maybe the place in the family. So for the example, with having two brothers that get treated really well, and you're the odd one out and you're getting treated really badly and your parents are really critical of you, you're going to have different trauma responses there. So the brothers would probably be more likely to have that fight response, or and then I'd say more kind of go under the radar, because you become, with a narcissistic parent, you become really hypersensitive about their emotions. You're walking on eggshells all the time. And you learn to be really, really aware, reading their emotions and meeting their needs, when it should be the other way around, because they're the parent, but you end up being the parentified child. So yeah, it just depends on temperament and age and what your nature and which way you're inclined to be. I say with I did this training course in Sydney ages ago, and it was from the abuse prevention services over there, and they were doing profiling of narcissistic men and kind of their trauma history. And they did two case studies. One was from, he went through lots of foster homes. He was subjected to a lot of physical abuse and emotional abuse, and he had a really rough run. So that was case study one. And in case study two, he grew up in a family with his mum who adored him. So he could do no wrong, and he'd really, done some bad things. And then all his mum, her response to that was like, oh, poor John, I'm so sad that this has happened to him when he was the perpetrator and had done all this bad stuff. He still didn't do any wrong in her eyes. So, narcissists can come from different parenting styles. So
wow. That is amazing. I actually think that my biological father, who I talked to you previously about, that he was not in the picture all of my life, he wasn't in the picture, but his, I believe totally by just what I've heard of him that he was narcissistic, because he was the Mr. couldn't do anything wrong, and literally the way when I think about the way he treated my mum and the way he left and how all of that happened, it was just narcissistic, because his parents would just be like, he can't do anything wrong, even when he would leave and come back and spend all their money and lose, just all sorts of crazy things, and they would always just defend him. And I think that I've always thought that he sounded like he would have been narcissistic, but I didn't realize that you could actually become narcissistic by parents who don't give you any boundaries, really.
Yeah, it was like, it's not good learning, isn't it? If you think, oh, I can go out there in the big world and do anything I want and I'm not going to have any consequences. Yeah, but then also they're lacking self-esteem, because when you go out into the world, and not everyone's going to adore you as much as your mum, and so when people don't adore you, they're like, well, what's something wrong with this? Why aren't you adoring me? I should be adored. And so it feels wrong to them. Whereas, say, somebody with a fawn response, or somebody that's had a different trauma response from toxic or narcissistic parenting, and you get so used to being around toxic personalities that when you go out in the world, it leaves you vulnerable, because you're not going to see it. That's normal to you. You're not going to go, whoa, I should not be treated like this. You're just like, well, okay, let's go with this. Yeah.
Wow. And then, other narcissists that I have come across have been the type that they can't do anything wrong, from not the perspective of having been treated like a king or a queen growing up, but actually having been treated like a piece of filth growing up, and be like just having none of their emotions met, and then coming out the other side of that and actually being like, nobody will ever be above me, like everyone's always beneath them after that. Now what is that? What kind of, is that just another kind of narcissism?
Yeah, well, that's still like fighting to get your needs met, because your needs weren't met at all through all those bad traumatic experiences, that you feel like, well, you got to be number one, you got to be kingpin or on top of the situation and control it, so that these bad things don't happen anymore.
Is there any healing for people like that? So I mean, there are like us who have had trauma in our lives from childhood, and we're kind of like, we have some little triggers here and there, but relatively normal-ish. But then there are those ones who are really, like the grandiose personalities, and that they can't even see it. And is there any, like, are there people who have been traumatized who just can't change, won't change, or can't see that they need change? Are there those types?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the person, whether they're ready for that and how they receive information. Yeah, but I know there's some really good work going on in, say, prisons, where they're doing trauma work and acknowledging, hey, you've gone through all these experiences as a child. It's not your fault. What happened to you is not your fault. But you have a choice now of how you want to respond to those triggers. And if you heal and take responsibility for your trauma, then you've got every opportunity for healing.
Oh, that is so amazing. So what general age group do you work with?
I usually work with, well, not little kids, like toddlers, because usually I do more parenting type work, and probably the youngest that I'd see would be around 6 and upwards. Yeah.
So it is mainly children that you work with, or do you
teens and adults? Yeah, across the board.
Yeah. So what's the parenting thing that you're talking about, that you've got some programs for? What exactly is that?
So I work with this organization called Manawaroa, and they work with OT, and we develop parenting programs for foster carers that are looking after kids that have gone through trauma. So it's kind of like trauma-focused parenting programs. Yeah.
Wow. And so are those programs specifically to your OT connections, like, or can you create programs outside of that, or is that specifically for them?
I do programs for whoever wants it, but those ones are particularly for that organization. So it's just teaching foster carers what to look out for, how to notice, this might be a trauma reaction or response rather than just naughty behavior, and speak through their behavior when they don't have the words to. And it's just looking at helping kids to understand their own feelings and connect the dots so they can make sense of it, and help them through it.
Wow, it sounds like a book might be up your sleeve. Even like there was somebody today who contacted me after seeing that you're coming on tonight, and she has actually got a book that is going out to all the schools at the moment, and it's like an animated book, and it's actually for children. It's I guess it's to work through trauma. I'm not exactly sure, I haven't read the book, but it's just amazing how you start having this alignment once you open the conversation. It starts coming in from all angles, but it's a really big, humongous topic, and it's like you could be talking about it forever. It's really big. Let me just check another question here. How do you have a relationship with a mother who stayed and is still with your abuser?
Yeah, that's a very difficult situation. And I guess in that situation, if your mother stayed with your abuser, it's like she becomes a secondary perpetrator, because really first priority, if you think for yourself, first priority is my kids, no matter what. And it must be very heartbreaking to have to go through that, and also triggering, because you're getting, if you stay in contact, that being around her must be a really big trigger. And sometimes I've worked with people in this situation, and it can be really difficult because part of you wants to cut ties, but part of you wants your mother. So I would definitely recommend seeking support and get some help to navigate that, because it's an incredibly difficult situation.
I do wonder sometimes if for example, the mother who stayed with the abuser, I do wonder sometimes if they need some help themselves, because just a situation that I know of at hand, a young guy whose mother kind of forces him to call his stepdad his dad, and he doesn't want to call him dad, and he's an adult person now and he doesn't want to call him dad, but the mum kind of enforces that whenever they're there together in the house. And he's not allowed to call him by his name, he has to call him dad, which is quite, doesn't want to. So
that's like going, go give your uncle a hug, and you don't want to give your uncle a hug. It's just overstepping boundaries.
So is that is that the other parent, like maybe not the abuser, but that is abusive as well, isn't it? That's creating trauma as well.
That's not letting you be yourself. If you're in that situation, you can't be your authentic self, because you're in that situation, and then you have to put the needs of your parent first rather than yourself. And then that's not right for the individual.
And what does that do to a child who has grown up thinking that they don't have any say over something like that?
Well, it can kind of get generalized to all your relationships where you feel like you don't have a say, where you might be more vulnerable to being taken advantage of or abused by people because you never learned the skills or had the capacity or space to be able to voice kind of your needs or what you wanted at the time or what was important to you, because it's always the parent's always deciding and not allowing you to be yourself.
That's so horrible. There is just so many different levels of trauma, and so many, I'm just looking at the questions about so many different levels of trauma and so many different ways that it can come about. So I know that there's not any standard answer for anything. It would, like you said, it's a holistic approach and it's for each person, isn't it? But do you have, like, so for example, when I talked to the psychologist that I had twice, and I unpacked so much just in 2 sessions, but he gave me some exercises that I could do just to sort of come back into myself in a situation where I was feeling tense. So when people are angry around me, and instead of shrinking into that little girl, he told me about, the whole taking your shoes off or feeling the ground under your feet, so you're kind of grounding again, and you sort of come back into your big girl instead of shrinking away into your little girl who was used to being quiet or hiding or whatever. Is there any just general things that you would say to people who are feeling triggered? Because I mean, we're triggered online all the time, like constant, it's everywhere. So just in general, are there some exercises that people could do just to bring themselves back into a state of calm?
Well, there's loads of them. There's just taking some deep breaths. There's a grounding technique, so that might be just doing something that puts you back in your shoes in the room, rather than being pulled back into the memories of childhood or bad experiences when you're in that moment and you're getting triggered. So things like going, okay, what's 3 things I can see in the room? Cup, computer, book. What's 3 things I can hear? I can hear Natalia, my own voice, and the crickets outside. Okay, what's 3 things that I can feel connecting with my body? I can feel the chair, I can feel my dress, I can feel my hair, and then take 3 deep breaths. So that's just a short little grounding exercise, just to put you back behind your eyes and in your shoes in the room.
Yeah, wow, because you actually can lose it really, really quickly if you do let yourself go away. I'm just trying to think of an example. I guess like I had quite bad financial abuse in my marriage, and so that's a big trigger to me now. Money is like, don't want to explain myself. I don't want calls with Inland Revenue. I don't want anybody ringing me if I don't know the number. Like those kinds of really scary things. And literally, it's taken me 10 years to be able to pick up phone calls with private numbers, because I was just so traumatized by, in case it's somebody ringing for money, because of the way we were left. And I think like, that was something that I had to go through over such a long period of time. I wish that I could have known that that was a trauma, and I didn't know that. So what would you say the percentage, like, again, you probably don't have statistics, but what would be the percentage of people? Do you think like everybody's traumatized in some way, or do you think that 50% of the world is, or like what does it look like?
I think everybody's got something. Yeah. Gabor Mate says that trauma isn't the traumatic event that you went through. It was the trauma, going through the traumatic event by yourself that you feel in present day. And it's those feelings and those emotions in your body and those thoughts in your mind. So we all go through things in childhood where we were alone and we didn't have the tools or resources to help us through that at that point in time. So, yeah.
So does everybody need just a little bit of like some kind of counselling just to see where they're at, or like
they want to? Yeah, it's always personal choice, and some people don't like talking, they hate it. So it just whatever works, whatever you find soothing to your soul and is helpful to you. But sometimes when you've gone through a lot of things and you haven't had that person to talk to, talking to somebody can be really helpful, because it's like having a whole pile of towels just come out of the dryer and it's all like scrunched up in the room on the floor. And therapy can be like kind of like airing them out and folding them up and putting them in the cupboard where they're nicely stacked and they're not just floating around your mind or popping up and you're thinking about them when you don't want to. So,
wow, yeah. That's amazing. But even that brings to mind that there are some people whose trauma response is having absolute order, making sure those towels are folded up and put perfectly in the cupboard. There's all sorts of different things and ways people respond to.
Yeah, definitely.
What an amazing job that you do. Let me just see this last question. Can people ever live functional lives if they never, oh, that's quite timely. Can they ever live functional lives if they never address their childhood trauma?
There's plenty of people that living out there functioning. There's lots of high functioning people that have gone through lots of trauma that live their lives. So it's not necessarily a life sentence, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to have joy and happiness in your life and that you can't be functioning. So it just depends on the individual person, what those experiences mean to you and if they're affecting you, and how much are they impacting on your quality of life right now.
Amazing. Oh, well, this has been a really interesting conversation, but I feel like I don't think it's going to end here. I feel like this could be an ongoing conversation if you don't mind, if you're up for it. And I think this has just kind of broken the ice, because I know that people are a little bit scared to ask questions before they really know what we're going to get talking about. So maybe we're going to put this into the newsletter and onto YouTube and all that sort of thing. So if there are any other questions that pop up from there, can we give them some contact details, or can we even maybe have another chat and cover some other questions off at some stage? Or
definitely. Yeah.
And
you the email, or if this brings up things and you don't know what to do, give us an email and we can point you in the right direction.
That is so awesome. Amazing. Wow, thank you so much for having a chat with us tonight. I know it's brief and there's no way we could ever get to the bottom of all of it in one chat, but thank you so much for that enlightenment. It was really, really amazing, and I hope we've answered some questions for some of the ladies out there, and but we will get back to you girls all. If you've got other questions, we'll in some way try and find some resources for them. And we'll work together on that. So thanks for coming. Thanks, girls, for listening. And we'll chat again soon. See you later.
Right. Bye.